All right, thank you, Chelsea. So yeah, today's topic is indoor herbs. What's the difference between indoor herbs and outdoor herbs? Well, we're going to talk about that, but primarily these are the ones that are going to be your mostly used in culinary practices type of herbs and other aromatic and medicinal properties as well. So Chelsea, if you want to go to the next slide. I always like to give a plug for the Kansas Garden Guide in this. If you watch this webinar, it's always mentioned, but this was just updated in 2023. All of this information can be found, or a lot of this information can be found in the Kansas Garden Guide. They've got a great section on herbs, as well as all the other fruits and vegetables that you may be growing. Not so much fruits. There are other publications for that, though. Next slide. And then I did want to give a shout out to these publications as well. There's one from the University of Missouri Extension and one from Iowa State University as well. Lots of great information here. If you check out these links in the bottom, these can help you definitely go through all the herbs that we're going to talk about. Next slide. So first thing is first is let's define an herb, right? So what is an herb? And the thing about herbs is you look up the definition of them and you can find numerous completely varying definitions. But essentially, what you're going to be looking at is a plant that has a useful property, right? It's a useful plant. The botanical definition is actually an herbaceous plant absent of woody stems, which dies back to its crown. Now, there is a lot of exceptions to this, right? We know rosemary is an herb. We know that sage is an herb. Both of those have woody stems. So botanical term, it kind of, it is loosely used when you're referring to herbs. Also, it is a plant or plant part valued for its medicinal, savory, or aromatic qualities, like we had just mentioned. But really, what it is going to be, it's going to be the fleshy part of a plant. So not the stem, but the leaves, the seeds, the stalks, the flowers, or the roots that can be used to utilize their oils or their chemical compounds that are desirable. And again, those can be for medicinal properties, they can be for savory reasons, or they can be aromatic qualities. Next slide. So before you go growing indoor herbs, there are some considerations that you need to take into mind, right? So there's your individual needs. What is your reason for growing indoor herbs? This is going to largely dictate the type of plants that you're wanting to grow, because each of these, while they do have similar care aspects to them, they're their own respective plants, right? So they each are going to need their own kind of respective care regimens. And then what are you trying to achieve with these plants? Again, they have different reasons to be used or utilized with each of them. So knowing which reasons these are going to be used for is going to help you out. Allocating indoor space, you need to know if you have a realistic amount of room available. With the majority of your indoor herbs, water is going to be a huge issue. And also natural light is going to be your biggest issue. If you don't have abundant indoor light, then you should probably be aiming for less amounts of indoor herbs, and it should probably be an herb that can actually handle, partial shade. And what about your life could hinder a successful indoor herb garden? So if you have a cat, or if you have curious children, you travel a lot, these are all these are all factors that can hinder the success of your gardens, right? So these are all extraneous factors that have nothing to do with taking care of plants, but they very much will, dictate whether your plants are successful. Next slide. So first, let's look at containers. The two main containers that you always see for indoor herbs are either going to be clay pots or plastic pots. The main difference between these is clay pots are porous, so they require being watered much more often. They dry out much quicker, essentially because there's air being able to get into that root ball a lot faster, right? This is actually best for your woody plants because these are going to keep the roots from rotting in these. Whereas with your plastic pots is going to retain that moisture longer. And with that retained moisture, it can actually, instigate that root rot. Hanging planters are another factor that or another option for you. These again are actually going to dry out quite quickly because they are up in the air. You've got moving air moving across that root ball, but they are an option. Drainage is going to be one of your biggest factors because you have to have that water moving out. You want consistently moist soil, but you don't want it overly saturated. Next slide. So speaking of soil, the primary soil pH that you're going to want to aim for is going to be right where that happy spot is for most of your fruits and vegetables, right? Is right to that slightly acidic to neutral range. That said, some plants will vary with this. Rosemary, for example, likes a little bit more of an acidic soil. So again, it's going to depend on the exact plant that you're growing. So you want to do your research. There are mixes available as far as soil goes for indoor herbs specifically or herbs in general. And again, these are going to have that adequate drainage that we discussed. You don't want your plants sitting in water, essentially. And one of the more unique factors of growing herbs is that you do not actually want to frequently fertilize them. This is really important to remember. While they do want nutrient-rich soil, the thing with excessive fertilizing of herbs is they're going to grow so quickly that all those oils and those chemical compounds are going to essentially be lessened, right? So it's going to result in poor flavoring and poor intensity of those desirable factors that you're looking for. So aim for slow and compact growth and do that with a low range fertilizer. That can be a 5-10-5 or something similar. Next. So as I mentioned, lighting is going to be absolutely crucial when it comes to your indoor herbs. All of these plants are generally native to like the Mediterranean area. And if you think about where that is, it is right there with bright sun. So you're going to want to put this in bright sun. 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight is really kind of crucial for most of these herbs. And if you can't supply that, then you should probably consider not having an indoor herb garden. Some can tolerate a light shade though. This may make them leggy and it may make them produce less. So just like with any houseplants, right, they're going to be reaching for the light. If they are leggy and they are producing less, that is a good indication it's not getting enough light. South facing and sunny windows are actually the best. But with your east or west windows, you may be able to get by as well. That said, you can still have an herb garden if you don't have all that indoor light, but you will have to supply that light from somewhere else. So for fluorescent supplementation or grow lights are also an option. Next slide. So there are a lot of common herbs to Kansas. Here's a very large list, right? And a good portion of these can be grown indoors, but the ones that we, commonly grow here would be basil, bay, chives, cilantro, dill, fennel, lavender, lemon balm, mint, oregano, parsley, rosemary, sage, savory, which is a leafy Mediterranean herb, tarragon, and thyme. Next slide. And then these ones here specifically are the ones that can actually be grown indoors very easily, right? So we have our basil, chives, mint, oregano, parsley, rosemary, sage, thyme, cilantro, and dill. All of these have a higher tolerance for lower light. They require less humidity, and they can tolerate cooler temperatures. So we're actually going to go through each of these here in a moment and kind of talk about some of their more unique aspects of care. Next slide. Okay, so first up, basil. One of the things that is unique to this plant is there are going to be numerous varieties available. And the variety that you want to select is going to depend on, again, the qualities that it has to it. There are some that are spicy, there are some that are sweet, there are some that have a lemon flavor to them. Some of them have or are utilized as seasoning, obviously, but there's also some that are utilized for fragrance. Some are even utilized just for the flowers they grow. So again, you're looking for the qualities specific to the ones that you're actually, or for the use that you're going to utilize this plant for. Pruning is essential during maintenance with this one. This is going to prevent your woody stems. Woody stems are what is going to lead to bitter flowering. Okay, so anytime that your basil is flowering, it's going to be making your plant bitter. So pruning this plant backwards or back in general is going to help your plants stay fresh and stay desirable. This also instigates new and fresh growth, so you'll continue that growth of those new fleshy leaves. This is an annual plant, so even grown indoors, it will eventually flower and die. So just keep that in mind. Next. So chives, obviously a relative of the onion. One of the things you want to keep in mind with this, it is a bulb plant. So in order to utilize the plant to its best ability and have those desirable stalks, you actually want to remove those flowers from it because those flowers are taking energy from the bulbs. You take the flowers off, and that energy can be directed towards the foliage, which is what you're consuming. This is harvested by simply snipping the leaves at the base. I'd work my way outward from the edge of the crown inward, and never remove more than, say, a third of the plants in general, because that is going to stress out the plants. These are very light dependent, and in the winter months, they may die back some. So just keep that in mind if you're growing indoors as well. Next. So mint is one of these plants that is almost always recommended to be grown in a container because it is so invasive if you grow it in a garden setting. Luckily, this won't be an issue for you growing it indoors, but if you are trying to grow this, say in like a container with other plants, just know it's probably going to take over that container. So you want to have it in its own segregated space. It's aggressive in the garden. Pinch the tips back on this regularly. This will promote fuller growth, and it discourages legginess. This will be a plant that tries to flop over and kind of gets scraggly. So pinching that back will keep that growth compact for you. Remove the blooms as they appear to preserve that potency. You're essentially reallocating those nutrients back to the desirable traits of the plant. And then periodically cut back the plant to control its woodiness. So this is one of those plants that will become woody eventually. So cutting this back every once in a while is going to help you prevent that and keep that new fleshy growth there. Next slide. Oregano is one of those plants that, again, has numerous varieties available. You can have an upright form to it, a prostrate form, which is spreading outward, or a mounding form. And you can account for this by selecting the appropriate pot size for the variety. That said, or that is because each variety is going to have a very different size associated with it. So know which variety you are working with and know how to account for that. Pinching the tops back to encourage fullness, again, is going to help you. Removing the flowers to retain flavor. And then again, with this plant specifically, you never want to remove more than 1/3 of the plants, because just like with trees and pruning, or anything in pruning really, you remove more than 1/3 of the plants, you're stressing out the plants, and it's going to decrease its overall health. Next slide. Parsley. So this performs best in sunny locations, as all of them do, but this one particularly is going to need a little bit more sun. Direct seeding can be very successful with this, but what you need to keep in mind is that parsley takes a long time to germinate. It may take up to 5 weeks for those seeds to do anything at all. So you may think you've been unsuccessful in planting these seeds, but you may just want to give them a little bit more time. Remove the flowers to conserve the energy again. And then this plant specifically, if you don't want to harvest the entire plant at once, or if you want to keep picking from it, harvesting the stalks from the outside inward is going to help you out, because those new stalks are going to appear in the middle as it continues to grow. This is a biennial plant, so the second year will be more bitter for that reason. A lot of people will actually use this as an annual, and they'll replant every year. Next slide. Rosemary, again, this one is a woody shrub. So this is one of those plants where it is considered an herb because it's actually the fleshy part of the plant that's being used, right? It's not the stem that's being eaten. If it was the stem that was being eaten, that would probably be more in the realm of a spice. But with this, you want to keep in mind that you're going to be repotting every few years, because this plant is going to get large. And it's going to get as large as you allow it to. That said, if you don't want it to get extremely large, you can try dividing. You can try just pruning back in general to keep that plant to its relative size, but you may have to prune the roots as well so it doesn't get root bound. It is a drought tolerant plant once it is established. It is an evergreen, so that is something to keep in mind. There are dwarf varieties available as well. So if you don't want to do all the pruning and you don't necessarily want to be repotting all the time, that may be your best option. This is a plant that you want to keep warm because it is not cold hardy whatsoever. So it will definitely benefit from that extra sunlight if you have a spot for it. Sage, this is another one that that will be a woody plant if you let it grow into its full form. The seed growth on this is slow, so it is actually better to propagate this from cuttings if you're wanting a full-grown plant right away. You do want to be prepared again to repot because this will be a large woody shrub eventually. But cutting this back and selectively pruning and removing those dead woody stems will allow for that new fleshy growth to stay there and keep your size of your plants relatively small. Thyme is one of those plants. This is one that can actually be grown outdoors very easily. It's zones 5 through 9, so it's an evergreen here, depending on the variety that you would be planting in the garden. That said, this plant needs very good air circulation because it's prone to fungal diseases. So you want to put it in a spot where there's constantly just wind or something moving the air around in that area. If it's in a windowsill, try cracking the window every once in a while just to move that air around. And that's going to prevent moisture from essentially congregating in those spots and from fungal spores spreading, right? Prefers ample sunlight like all of our herbs do here. The more you prune with this one, the faster it's going to grow because those pruning cuts are going to stimulate new growth. So if you want a large mounding plant, go in there and start pruning the edges of those stems. So cilantro, you may think this one's very similar to parsley because they look so similar, but they actually have quite different care aspects. This prefers afternoon shade because it really can't handle the heat very well. It's going to kind of just not perform well. It's going to start wilting very easily in hot conditions. So morning sun is best. Direct seeding may actually require husk removal because these seeds are so thick, they have a sort of woody husk around them. So you may have to break those husks. You may have to remove them altogether to get the seeds to grow. Removing flowers to conserve energy, again, is going to help. But using or keeping the flowers, then you will be able to grow coriander seeds, right? So everyone, uses coriander or cilantro interchangeably. Cilantro is actually the leaf. Coriander is the seed. So if you want both, then go ahead and let your flowers grow, and then you will be able to do that. Just know that your cilantro portion of the plant isn't going to quite produce as well. This plant is a plant that will eventually bolt. So once it does that, it will die. So just keep that in mind. You will have to eventually replant and replace this. Similar to the parsley, however, harvest the stalks from the outside inward, and this will help you continue that new growth as long as it will continue. This plant does have a long taproot, so you want to put this in a pot that's going to be probably its final home. Specifically, these herbs that have long taproots, they do not enjoy being replanted. So put it in its spot that it's going to stay in. Dill has long stalks, right? So that is one thing that is very common to these plants. So keep in mind that especially grown indoors, this plant is going to be reaching for the lights. It's going to be leggy anyway, but it's also going to have stalks. So you're going to want to stake these most likely, protect them from breezes because that's going to break your stalks, and then your plant's going to obviously not perform as well. It also has deep taproots, so similar to the cilantro, you're going to want to keep it in its final home. Flowers and seeds are edible, so that's something to keep in mind. If you don't just want to be eating the foliage of it, you can actually eat almost all of this plant. And harvest this as needed, reserving 2/3 of the plant. Again, this is one of those plants, don't remove more than 1/3. And so one thing I just wanted to really focus on or really reiterate before I hand this over to Chelsea is good drainage and direct sunlight are going to be your best friends when it comes to an indoor herb garden. You can get by with, artificial light, but really having that good soil that is going to keep the plant roots moist, but not overly saturated is going to be best. And then that heat and that light from the sun is really going to help you out with most of your herbs most. Again, really, you wanted to pay attention to the unique properties of each plant because they're not all the same plant, right? They're herbs because they have their own unique, desirable qualities to them, but they don't have the exact same care needs. And then when we looked at pests and disease issues, being that these are eaten typically directly, I don't generally like to recommend, harsh pesticides with this. So ones that are, available that can be utilized that wouldn't be as, risky for consuming would be neem oil or insecticidal soap if you're seeing insect issues. There are also some fungicides out there, but they'll need to be labeled specifically for the condition that you're seeing. So always follow your label instructions very, very carefully. So with that, do we want to hold off on questions until the end, Chelsea, or do we want to answer some now?
If there's any questions, we can go ahead and address those now on the growing and harvest or the growing piece. Feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself. All right, well, we will keep continuing. Again, feel free to put them in the chat as things come up, and we'll have some more time at the end to go through questions.
I did have one quick question that came. For those of us that know we will need grow lights, any quick advice on that? Yeah, you want to just pay attention to the type of grow light that you are working with. Make sure that it's producing the correct amount of light for these plants. You want something that's going to simulate the sun as best as it can. So really the best advice I can give on grow lights is read the reviews, because all the experience of the previous gardeners that have used those without me, giving recommendations on specific brands. That's really going to be your best route of action when it comes to knowing which ones perform well.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and move on to the kitchen portion. But again, feel free to put your comments, questions in the chat. So I'm going to talk about making indoor herbs a staple in your kitchen. As I mentioned in the beginning, and for those who joined a little bit late, my name is Chelsea Reinberg, and I am the Nutrition, Food Safety, and Health Agent. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to preserve, how to use, and give some recipe ideas as well. So the first thing I want to address is that there will be some health statements in this presentation about herbs. It is important to note that any health statement you see out there regarding herbs have not been evaluated by the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration. Information presented is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or condition. Again, like anything related to health and nutrition, you have to use your own judgment, and that there are some things that we'll address in the next slide that herbs and spices, and there's been different medicinal properties to them, but again, they're not intended to treat, cure, or prevent any disease. So herbs do add flavor to foods and beverages without adding fat, sugar, sodium, and calories. They provide a lot of flavor, which is why they are very useful in culinary practices. Most herbs fall into two or more of these categories. So you have your aromatic, your culinary, medicinal, and ornamental. Again, medicinal, especially as we go into the route of food as medicine and kind of functional nutrition and functional medicine. A lot of herbs and spices may have medicinal properties, but it's important to note that you consult with a healthcare professional before you go ahead and tackle those yourself. So we're going to address mostly the culinary properties. So the biggest question that people sometimes wonder is, when do I add herbs in the cooking process? So there's kind of two categories of this. You have your more delicate herbs and your less delicate herbs. The more delicate herbs you'll want to add as late into the cooking process as you can. This is really a minute or two before the end of cooking. And these are also best sprinkled on food after the food is already prepared. For example, parsley, cilantro, chives, mint, dill, all of those sometimes are used more as the garnish on top and are added to dishes after the fact. Less delicate herbs, they can be added early on in the cooking process, and that is when they are best added because they're able to build out that flavor, or about the last 20 minutes of cooking. So this is soups and things that have that longer cooking time. Examples include your rosemary, tarragon, thyme, and the dill seeds. Some foods think of like breads and batters that you may use fresh herbs in. If you make bread, you know that once the bread is pretty well set, you can't go in and add your herbs after. So for those instances, you would want to add your herbs early in at the beginning instead of after. For uncooked foods like dips and spreads, if you are using fresh or dried herbs, it is best to add those several hours before serving. And this is really to allow those flavors to blend throughout the dish. Another common question people have is the equivalence for fresh and dried. So at the peak of the season, when you have a lot of fresh herbs, you may be using those, but as you go late into the season in these winter months, you may be having more dried herbs. So here's kind of some general recommendations. 1 tablespoon of finely cut herbs is equal to about 1 teaspoon of crumbled dry herbs, which equals about 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of ground dried herbs. So if you think of the crumble herbs versus the dried herbs, the composition is different. So crumbled takes up a little bit more space, which is why you'd use a little bit more than those very finely ground dried herbs. It is important to note that when you double a recipe, it is recommended to not double the spices and herbs. Really, it's not a 1-to-1 equivalent as if you were doubling it for all the other ingredients. You would want to increase by amounts of 1 to 1.5 times and then taste and add more as needed. You can't take spices, salt, anything out once it's already in there. So it's best to start a little bit on the lower end and not exactly double it and then add more as needed. Keeping dried herbs fresh. Again, we're talking a lot about fresh herbs, but you may choose to dry them, which we're going to talk about in the next few slides. Really, the important thing with your dried herbs is to make sure that you're avoiding moisture, light, heat, and air. Those are what will make the herbs go bad quicker. You'll want to store those dry herbs in an airtight container in a cool and dark place. Where do most people store their herbs and spices? Right by their stove, right? It may be on the top above their stove, right to the side, but that's where a lot of that heat is. If you're boiling a pot of water, you know that when you lift off that lid, all that moisture comes up out of it in the steam. So you want to store those herbs away from your stove if possible. You're just going to have less heat and light and moisture in at that point. You'll want to store your whole leaves if you can before you ground them up because they preserve the flavors longer. So for example, if you're using rosemary, you could store your whole rosemary dried and then go ahead and grind it up or crush it right before you're going to use it. Again, that will keep the flavor a little bit stronger longer. Really properly stored dried herbs last about 6 months to a year. I'm sure all of you are probably rolling your eyes right now and just knowing how many herbs you have in your cupboard that are probably 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. Who knows how old they are? But really, it's not dangerous in terms of a food safety perspective. The longer your herbs are in your cupboards, the longer it has the chance to diminish those flavors. So instead of using a teaspoon of dried parsley to get the same flavor, you may have to use a couple teaspoons or a tablespoon to get that same equivalent of the flavor profile that you're looking for. To check for freshness of your dried herbs, you can go ahead and take a small amount and you're going to rub it in your hands, or if you have a mortar and pestle, go ahead and crush them up. If the aroma is fresh, rich, and immediate, then it means that it still is going to flavor your foods in a good, abundant way. So drying, a lot of times you may have all your fresh herbs and especially if you grow them outdoors. If you are growing them indoors, then you may have them last a little bit longer. But as you're growing them outdoors and you're transferring into those colder months, you may be wanting to dehydrate and save some of those, especially basil is a common one that people tend to have a lot of. So there's a few different ways you can dry. A dehydrator is going to be the fastest and easiest way to dry high quality herbs. Again, this is because the temperature and air circulation can be controlled. Your less tender herbs, you can tie them into small bundles and hang them up to air dry. This is usually better color and retention is if you dry them indoors versus outdoors. So finding a cool place in your house to dry them is going to be a little bit better for that flavor and color retention. Your more tender leaf herbs, hang drying those inside paper bags is a good option. You can just kind of punch or tear little holes inside of the bags and then suspend them upside down, closing the top. This is where then the air can circulate throughout the bag, allowing them to dry, and it actually collects then any leaves and seeds that fall as that herb is drying. Another method, which can be especially nice for mint, sage, or bay leaf, is to dry the leaves separately. So laying them out, drying them separately, it will work. You want to remove the best leaves from the stems, lay the leaves out on paper towels, and don't allow them to touch. Cover them, and then putting them kind of 5 layers stacked on top of each other at one time, and then drying in a cool oven is going to be a good method for this. Again, any method, like you could definitely dry these options in a dehydrator, but these are just some different options for you to work with. Another method of preserving is freezing. This honestly is one of my favorite ways just because it's easy. It takes up a little less space, a little more time consuming, or a little less time consuming, and it's easy just to kind of directly pop into food. So a couple options is you can freeze them in oil or water. Basically, what you would do is you would chop up the sprigs or the leaves, you would place them in an ice cube tray, and it is really recommended to use what you would normally use in a recipe. So sometimes recipes don't call for 2 or 3 tablespoons. They may just call for a tablespoon. So putting a tablespoon, you kind of know how much is in each, so you can use that accordingly. You'll then cover it with oil or water and just pop it in a freezer. You can use an ice cube tray. You can use any type of freezer safe container that you have that works for you. You can then add those frozen little ice cubes with the herbs directly into the cooked food or during the cooking process. So this works nice if you have some oil, it gives you that oil and that flavoring, and then the herbs all in the same little bit. Because it's also such a small amount, that extra little water really won't affect the quality of the food as you're cooking it, especially if it's a food that requires a little bit of liquid. The other option, if you don't freeze them in oil or water, is to just go ahead and freeze them directly, placing them on a tray and covering them lightly with plastic wrap just to prevent that freeze the moisture from sticking on them and freezing. You would then place in a Ziploc or a vacuum sealed bag, and you always want to date and put the name of that herb on it. This method of freezing this way works best for those hardier herbs. You have a variety of different things you can do with your herbs. You can make an herb salt. You can do like an herb sugar, homemade seasoning mixes. All of these work great and are also great gifts. Again, you want to store them the same way, keeping them dry, cool, in a dark place in an airtight container. Experiment, see what works for you, what you like, and there's really the possibilities are endless. Tea infusions, this is another way to use some of your herbs, especially your dried herbs. The best way is once you dry them, you would store them in a container appropriately. You would then steep your herbs in boiling water. And so doing this will produce the strongest teas, steeping them for at least 15 minutes, and then go ahead and strain those out. In general, making tea with fresh herbs required 3 times as much as with dried herbs. So that's why dried herbs tend to be a little bit better. You can use a little bit less of them in your teas. Most tea, the ratios are about 1 teaspoon of a dried primary herb and then half a teaspoon of a dried secondary herb per cup of water. Again, experiment, mix and match. That is just a recommendation, but adjust based on your flavor preference. You can make herb infused oils and vinegars. The caveat is that you must follow specific guidelines when making and storing these. There is a higher risk of foodborne illness with these. The biggest thing is with these is you can't make them and store them for long periods of time. So let's say you make a rosemary infused olive oil. You can go ahead and make that, but it is best to be stored in the refrigerator and to be used within a few days. You do not want to make these and give them as gifts or think that you're going to store it in your cupboard for long periods of time. Here are two publications that go ahead and give you some guidelines of how to make and store those safely for these oils and vinegars. The one specifically is for thinking of oils as well, is you don't want to have any garlic mixture with it. Garlic in oils can potentially result in botulism. So again, same thing with that. You want to just make sure that you're following safety guidelines. Herbed butters and jellies. These are great. Herbed butter adds a lot of flavor, especially while you're cooking or adding it to crackers, a charcuterie board, whatever is the best way that you would like to do it. These make nice because you can go ahead and make it and freeze it, especially for the butters. The general ratio is about 1 stick of butter, a half a cup to a quarter cup of chopped fresh herbs, of any herbs of your choice. Mixing that up, you'll soften the butter, mix it up, and then you can either roll it in plastic wrap into a tube or put it in any other container of freezer safe, or you can just obviously keep it in your fridge if you're going to use it right away. Jellies are another way that you can incorporate some herbs. With these, you really do want to make sure that you're using approved and tested recipes from reputable sources. The Ball brand, a lot of extension services have tested and reputable sources. You don't want to try to make your own because herbs can slightly potentially throw off pH. Of course, you want to make sure that you're using very clean, fresh herbs to not incorporate any bacteria into those jams or jellies that you're making and using it with. Now we're going to talk just a little bit about a few of the different options. One thing is I don't know if you probably not be able to see it with the blurred background there, but there's a book called The Flavor Bible, which basically talks about all different types of spices, herbs, even fruits and vegetables and produce, and really what pairs well with them. So some of this information that I got came out of this food Bible that just talks about what you can compare, what you pair it with, complementary herbs and spice pairings, as well as things maybe to avoid. So for example, basil, we're talking about just regular basil, not any of the other varieties, but this is going to pair well with a variety of fruits and vegetables, your bell peppers, broccoli, blueberries, carrots, cheeses. Obviously, this goes very well with cheeses. Pestos, marinades, potatoes, and tomatoes are all things that this pairs well with. Some complementary herb and spice pairings. This goes well with chives, cilantro, garlic, oregano, mint, parsley, rosemary, and thyme. The interesting thing about basil is it does contain some essential nutrients that are important for our body. It actually has calcium and vitamin K. Again, the amount of basil that you would eat in a serving as a seasoning is really only 1 tablespoon or so. So you're not going to rely on this as your primary source of getting these nutrients. But it is helpful to know that when we are using basil in our foods, that it does provide some of those nutrients for us. You have a few different varieties. Of course, you have your sweet basil. There is Thai basil, there's lemon basil, all of the different ones. An interesting thing that I had not heard before until I kind of dug a little bit deeper in that food Bible is that it is recommended to not pair tarragon with basil. I'm not really sure why, but that is just one of the recommendations, that those flavor profiles don't work well together. So storing your basil, you can store it in the refrigerator in a loosely covered bag. This tends to work best. You could also store it in an upright glass of water. Those are kind of the recommendations for how to keep your fresh basil longer. And then, of course, you can dry it if you have an excess. Here's one recipe. Again, feel free to take a photo of this. The PowerPoint or the recording will be sent out after, so you can go back and find these recipes if you would like to try them out. But as I mentioned before, basil goes really well with your zucchini and your carrots. And then obviously we have some of those other herbs that go well with basil. You have your parsley, your dill, chives. So those are all included there. The next one is chive. This pairs really well with avocados, egg dishes, fish, potatoes, salmon, your root vegetables, and your zucchini. It is related to the garlic, leeks, onion, shallot, so it's going to have kind of that similar profile. People tend to like this in dishes because it's not quite as strong and it just still provides a little bit of that flavoring. The interesting thing with this is that studies have shown that it may help lower blood pressure. Again, as I said at the beginning, all of these are not to diagnose, treat, or prevent anything, but just know that they do have added benefits. The quantity that you typically eat them in, though, is not going to be your main source for helping you lower that blood pressure. You always want to use chives fresh and not cooked. They are best this way. If you do need to cook them for whatever reason, making sure that you are just adding it at the very last minute as possible. The cucumber herb dressing. Here's an example pairing that cucumber. So this recipe has a yogurt dressing. So instead of the typical cucumber dressing that may have that mayonnaise that we're used to, this one uses a low fat plain, or you could even use a Greek yogurt. Has some of those fresh herbs like chives and parsley and some Dijon mustard. This one, you actually puree the cucumber together, which adds a nice kind of creaminess to this dip. Cilantro. Cilantro pairs well with a lot of different things. Avocados, your peppers, coconut milk, all those kind of options. Complementary herbs are listed there. Interesting thing with cilantro is it may support your heart health. And then, of course, there's the different flavor profiles. Same as with chives, you always want to use cilantro fresh or add it at the very last minute. Interesting, you can use cilantro to add kind of some cooling notes, especially when you're using those chili pepper spice dishes. It kind of cuts that heat a little bit of those spicy dishes. Some people, as you know, absolutely hate cilantro, and some people absolutely love cilantro. Some people say that cilantro tastes like soap. This is because people have something called different super tasters. And so there was some studies looking at why do people have a different taste when some people can taste cilantro and taste a good thing, and then some people taste cilantro and taste soap. So a study was looking at some of those genetic conditions, or sorry, excuse me, genetic variants and kind of the makeup of our bodies. And so there's certain compounds and components of us as individuals that certain individuals have a genetic makeup that are kind of those that taste the soap versus those who taste just cilantro as something delicious. So that's just something interesting. Cilantro lime chicken. This is a great dish to make. It's easy that you can kind of prepare it all and have it in your fridge or in your freezer to cook. Goes well with a variety of dishes, but basically it's just you have this marinade that you'll use to coat the chicken. You can use chicken thighs, chicken breast, whatever you may have. And then that lime and cilantro. And then this also has a little bit of cumin and garlic for some additional flavoring. Mint. Mint, there's sweet and spicy aroma. It pairs well with a variety of different things listed there. Mint tea is one of those. You have your potatoes, yogurt, your dark chocolate specifically, it pairs well with, and some different vegetables. Complementary herb pairings are listed there: basil, clove, cumin, dill, ginger, parsley, and thyme. Mint may aid in digestion and has antimicrobial properties. Some people will do like a mint tea, or will take a mint peppermint if they're having indigestion or just have an upset stomach. Some people say to avoid oregano with mint. Again, I think this is a personal preference, and some people just say that those flavor profiles don't go well together. There are different types of mints. And so when we talk about mint, it's more of a general mint. But when we talk specifically about peppermint, it is used more often in those sweet dishes. So it's combined mostly with those fruits and those chocolates and things like that. Here is a recipe with a green bean with lemon mint dressing. So this uses fresh green beans, or if you have frozen green beans, but the frozen green beans will have just a little bit of a different texture. So using fresh green beans has mint, shallot. Again, you could use any type of onion in place of the shallot. And then just some black pepper. And then we have rosemary. Rosemary, I feel like, is a staple in most people's kitchens. It goes well with a lot of different things. Specifically, your, again, beans, peppers, eggplant, fish, lamb. Um, it works well with marinades, pork, potatoes, poultry, tomatoes, and your winter squashes. Complementary pairings are there. A rosemary lavender actually is a very good combination, which you wouldn't expect it to be, but they support and complement each other very well. Rosemary contains antioxidants, which antioxidants are good for keeping our cells nice and healthy, and it may support cognitive health. Rosemary does have a strong flavor, so you want to make sure that you are using it in an appropriate ratio. And interesting with this one is from the food Bible, it had said that it is recommended to avoid corn with rosemary, and that sometimes the Middle Eastern cuisines don't work well with those rosemary profiles, salads, and then some people say zucchini. Again, these are just recommendations. Of course, everyone has their own flavor profiles they like, and experimenting with different recipes and different herbs is always a good thing. Fresh rosemary shortbread cookies. So rosemary is one of those that can kind of be a savory thing to make a sweet, like a shortbread cookie, a little more savory. And so you see here, this shortbread cookie just really has butter, confectioner's sugar, all-purpose flour, some fresh minced rosemary, and some salt. And then sage. Sage, again, pairs well with a variety of different foods. When we think of sage, typically is one that we think of during Thanksgiving, the holidays, pairs well with those poultry soups, those more savory dishes. Interesting for the fruits, it pairs well with cherries. Complementary herbs are listed there. Same with this one. This herb may support cognitive health, has antioxidants, and has microbial effects. The taste can be different, sweet, bitter, or sour. And then with this one as well, you want to always use this one as cooked and never raw. And you want to add it near the end of the cooking process. In some dishes, again, some other dishes, like if you're making a stuffing or a chicken, you obviously add that earlier on in the process. But you never want to use sage as a raw herb, always cooked. And here's just another recipe, pork chops with apple, fennel, and sage. That fennel and sage go really well together. And that apple provides a little bit of that sweetness with the pork chops. And our contact information is there. If you have any questions related to food, nutrition, food safety, or health, go ahead and give us a call or send us an email at foodhelp@jocogov.org. And we do have a monthly food and nutrition newsletter that just gives you more tips and tricks and gives you a recipe of the month and other fun nutrition, food safety, and health information. So you can sign up there, scanning the QR code or using the link, or you can go directly to our website and sign up that way as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over for any questions.
We did have one question in the chat, and they're asking if we will be sharing the PowerPoint because there's lots of information to absorb. Yes, we will figure out a way to get that PDF version of that uploaded online, and we'll get that sent out to you guys.
Does anybody have any comments or questions? We share information, but I know you all have experiences and different things as well to share with the group. So feel free, if you don't have a question, if you just have a comment or something else. There's a question for you.
What is the easiest herb? Yeah. What is the easiest herb to try to start growing with little light? You know, I'm trying to think. There's quite a few that definitely need a lot of light. So it's going to really kind of be trial and error. I would say probably try something with some of your woodier herbs sooner, like maybe a rosemary. That would be less light than say some of your herbs like a oregano that needs bright lights. When is the best time to start parsley seeds for our area? If you're growing them indoors, you can start them at any time. Just know that they're going to take about 5 weeks to germinate. So you want to time that out accordingly to when you want to start using them. That said, growing anything in the winter is going to be a bit of a challenge. It's going to be less heat, less light, um, a little bit colder. So it's going to be harder to grow them in the winter. The best time to start them would probably be spring when everything else is being planted.
All right, does anybody have any other questions? If not, we will go ahead and end for the day. Thank you all for coming, and excuse me, as we said in the beginning, these recordings and slides, will get them circulated around to everybody, and reach out at any time if you have any questions. And then stay tuned for next month. We will do our next Dig Your Dinner. And that'll be the sign up, and information will be circulated around soon for that.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Have a good day.